Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today I'll be talking about A-level chemistry, as well as the tips and techniques that I use to do well for it. So just some background info, I took the A-levels in Singapore, and these are the subjects that I took for A-levels, which you can read over here. So I studied H2 chemistry from 2017 to 2018, and I got back my results on 2019, which was an A grade, the highest possible for Singapore A-levels. So over here you will see the timeline. I'll first talk about chemistry as a subject, my results in school, the study tips that I have to share, as well as to conclude my overall feelings about chemistry. There will be timestamps in the description below, so if you want to skip to any part, just feel free to skip to it. So first up, I would like to share what I think about chemistry as a subject. I will first want to say that my thoughts are definitely not conclusive of chemistry as a subject as a whole, since my level of understanding is just that of an A-level student. So personally, I find chemistry very much like a experimental subject, where you will see things happening around the world and you try to explain about it. I find that compared to the other two STEM subjects that I took, which were physics and mathematics, I personally found chemistry a lot more interesting, especially when it came to the hands-on where you did experiments. Like when you do all those titration experiments and you see all the color changes, it just feels really cool to me. Honestly, learning chemistry might sometimes feel kind of dry since there's so much content, but I find that the experiments really made up for it, for my experience on chemistry as a whole. Next up, there were a lot of exceptions that I found in chemistry as I was studying it as a subject. I think perhaps it may be because my level of understanding about chemistry is just lacking. So whenever I try to research more on all these exceptions, some of the concepts were just beyond my level of understanding. So a lot of times I had to just live with these exceptions in the subject. Chemistry was also quite a memory intensive science for me compared to physics and mathematics, especially when it came to organic chemistry. I was just quite daunted by the amount of things that I had to remember as a chemistry student. So let me just share with you my results throughout my junior college life all the way up to A levels. So from my year one all the way up to my prelims, I got a few A's and B's here and there, but my percentile still remain quite high, above 90 for throughout the year, with 100 percentile being the top few in the cohort. And overall for the A levels, I achieved an A grade. I'm just putting my results out here so that I can perhaps add some credibility to the tips that I'm about to share now. So over here, you will see the summary of the tips that I'm going to share. You can pause the video right now so that you can read it out. If you came from my physics video, perhaps you want to skip the general part over here because I'll be essentially saying the same things that I said for my physics video. So let's get started. So first up, I would advise you to start strong and stay ahead with your studies. JC is just a really short 2 years, so if you lag behind too much at the start, it may eventually snowball on you such that you find it difficult to catch up, especially since you will be taking multiple subjects at the same time. You should also stay disciplined and finish up your to-do list before you have a long break for the rest of the day. Just take some short breaks in between here and there between your assignments so that you can keep up the pace consistently for the day. Personally, for me, I practice this act of delayed gratification, where I will finish up everything that I need to do before I have a long break for the rest of the day. I find that it just feels a lot better so that you can get your mind totally off work, and at the same time you will feel quite accomplished for the day. Since JC is just a very short 2 years, you should also be wise with your time. Make sure that you are studying smart, which I will come to that a bit later, and make sure that you always keep healthy, both physically and mentally. So you should dedicate some time to exercising. And mentally wise, you can probably just engage in your hobbies or just hang out with your friends. Personally, for me, I also try to keep a good sleep schedule where I usually wake up and fall asleep at about the same time. So usually the day will end for me at about 10:30 to 11 p.m. roughly. And then I will go to bed at about 11:30 p.m. and wake up the next day at about 6:30 a.m. for school, regardless of what time school starts. And for the weekends, maybe usually I will sleep at about 12 a.m. max. And I'll wake up at about 8 p.m. 8 a.m. maximum. So these two schedules here don't really differ from too much from each other. And by keeping up with such a sleep schedule, I will feel less lethargic when I wake up the next day because my body is already quite accustomed to waking up at about the same time. I'm quite sure you have heard from your seniors or your siblings about how most A-level students will probably sleep at like 12 a.m. to 1 a.m. because of the amount of work that they need to do. But I personally didn't struggle with that because I believe the reasons are because I didn't procrastinate too much and I really just kept myself quite disciplined to accomplish my work on time. And I think those reasons are a big factor as to why I could have such a early sleep schedule, if you ask me. Next up, make sure that you are using the learning outcomes from your school notes. Whenever your school provide handouts or notes, usually they will attach a learning outcome for the students right here, as you can see. These learning outcomes are a very good way for you to track your progress along the chapter. So you should also formulate your notes based on these learning outcomes to help you gauge your understanding. So if you can truly accomplish all these learning outcomes right here, then you can truly say that you have quite a good mastery of the subject. Also, when you have any doubts, you should clarify and not let them snowball. So usually when my teacher is going through a lecture and I find it difficult to ask questions, I will usually write the question down, as you can see here, and try to resolve them later. I also make it a habit for me to write down the page number of the questions that I have, so that I will not forget to resolve them. And once I have resolved them, then I will just cancel them out to indicate that I have resolved it. I think that it is a good idea for you to study with friends, since as long as the group doesn't find each other too distracting. It is nice to have study companions, and whenever you have any doubts, you can also seek out your friends to help you out, since they are usually more readily available. All these conceptual discussions that you have with your friends will eventually help to also improve your concepts on the subject overall. If you find yourself in a dire situation and you don't know what to do, it may be a good idea for you to seek your teacher for help, as they are there to help you out. For me personally, my teacher doesn't really like me asking her questions via online, but she will always make the time for me to seek her for a face-to-face consult if I need to. So if you really find that you need more help on the subject, it is a good idea for you to seek out your teacher. If you find out that you really need extra help, you may want to consider going for extra lessons outside of school. I personally didn't go for any extra lessons outside of school because first up, they're very expensive, and I didn't find myself in a position whereby I needed extra help outside of school. But from what I hear from my friends, usually teachers outside of school are very good at their craft, so they can easily de-escalate the chapter quite well so that it will become easier to understand. I would say that if you need a lot of help, or you find that time is not on your side since A level is probably going to start soon and you need that last kick to push up your grades, that is when you may want to consider getting extra help outside of school. Also, next up, I will just say this upfront for you to not underestimate chemistry's content. It is really quite a lot, and out of all the STEM subjects that I took, which was physics, chemistry, and mathematics, chemistry I really found it to be the heaviest in content. Since the pacing of A level is also quite fast, meaning 2 years, I would say most schools will aim to finish the content in maybe like 1 year and a quarter of the year up to 1.5 years. So basically in this short time frame, the amount of content that you need to remember is really a lot. So you should really not underestimate it and try to do your best to keep up with it. This brings me to my next point of remembering your content well. There are really a lot of reactions, mechanisms, and formulas to learn and remember, especially when it came to organic chem. At that point, you should really learn the basics of the chapter as well. So for example, things like acid and base will give you salt and water at complete neutralization. You should understand all these fundamental guiding principles well, so that you will not confuse yourself as more and more compounds come along. Like example, alcohol, then you have carboxylic acid and phenol. You just have so many compounds to remember that you should really understand all these fundamentals well, as they will guide you through the knowledge of a chapter, since all these fundamental principles will not change. Next up, you really need to make sure that you master your organic chemistry well. I cannot reiterate this enough because personally for me, it really caused me a lot of problems in chemistry in JC. There were just simply too many things that I had to remember. Like for example, just take a look at alcohol and you have all these reactions that you have to remember already. So all this content was really quite daunting for me. And honestly, organic chemistry was the first reason why I got my first B in my JC life. Cause I remember back in the days, I was really a heavy crammer, and usually I would just spend a few days before the exam and go and memorize and get all this knowledge ingrained to my memory. And once organic chemistry came about, I remember I studied from about 12 p.m. all the way up to maybe like 3, 4 a.m. And then I took a rest and I studied again from 5:30 a.m. to about maybe 7:30 a.m. And I just really grinded and grinded, and I still couldn't keep all this knowledge in my head through cramming. And that was partly the reason why I got my first B, which I didn't do too bad as I expected. But all this cramming was really just too torturous for me, that I just couldn't keep up with all the content. So honestly, this these two study techniques right here really was a lifesaver for me for organic chemistry, because this means that I could keep the content in my head, and not only could I keep the content in my head, I could keep it fresh all the time. So all these two study techniques here really did help me out for organic chemistry. Another resource that I found that really helped me out was this book right here. Now I personally don't like spending money on all these self-help books and rather just rely on school notes. But organic chemistry really caused me quite a few problems in JC, because a lot of the times I just didn't understood why things happen this way. And I found that this book really helped me out to resolve some of my doubts by explaining some underlying concepts that my school didn't teach me. So overall, I found that this book was really helpful for me in trying to better understand organic chemistry as a whole. My next tip for you is to learn to live with exceptions when you study chemistry. Now, personally, I'm quite a very logical guy, so I sometimes can't tolerate the fact that there are like anomalies in the things that I study. But I guess it's just something that comes along with experimental science. But I think more appropriately is because my level of understanding at the A level is just simply not enough for me to understand some underlying principles as to why all these exceptions happen. So if you don't want to invest too much time in finding out more about stuff, you really need to learn to live with the exceptions that you will find in chemistry. So now my next tip for you is to really make sure that you prioritize your studying quality over the quantity. So whenever you engage in a study session, make sure all the distractions are away and make sure that you are actually studying smart. So for me personally, as like I said, chemistry is a very content heavy subject. I personally really use these two methods a lot, active recall and spaced repetition, so that I can keep the knowledge of chemistry fresh in my brain all the time. You can check out my other video for you to see how I use these two techniques when I study for a subject that is especially content heavy. Now next up, make sure that you are applying your understanding when you learn the subject. Doing active recall and spaced repetition is just to make sure that your content level is at 100% for the subject. But just because your content is up there does not mean that you know how to answer the questions that the exams may post. So make sure you try out the practice questions as well as practice papers and your school papers. Make sure that you try and do your best in all of them so that it will truly reflect your level of understanding at that point in time. As for past year A-level papers, I would advise you to do them once your school has gone through all the content. So your content level of A-levels should be at 100% or at least close to that. This is so that when you test yourself through the A-level papers, you can truly get a good gauge of your level of understanding at the A-levels, and so that you will not waste this opportunity to test for A-level papers. Next up, this is a tip that I missed out from my physics video, but you should be learning from your mistakes. But don't study the mistakes that were caused by your lack of content. And so basically, don't try and study for mistakes due to a gap of knowledge. So for example, you got a particular question wrong because you forgot that acid and base give you salt and water. Salt and water. Basically, you shouldn't be studying mistakes that were due to your lack of knowledge. So for example, things like this. Because by right, you should have already done notes on this, and it's just at that point in time you forgot about it. So if you study this particular mistake again, it's kind of like studying overlapping material. So in the long run, you'll be wasting your time. What you should study about is instead things like missing out the keywords, the words that you need to write for the exam, which it means that you know the content, but then you just missed out this particular word that is required for you to earn the marks in the exam. Or you should focus on the conceptual errors whereby you got this particular error because you got confused or misunderstood a particular content in your subject. So you should learn to rectify this. So these are the main mistakes that you should be studying from when you do questions or papers. So those were all the tips that I have to share about chemistry. As to conclude overall, I personally still found chemistry to be a very fascinating subject because the experiments are really cool, and it felt less dry to me compared to physics and mathematics, since the hands-on are so fun. At the end of the day, chemistry still feels a lot like a experimental science to me, and sometimes I just find it really hard to accept the exceptions that are present in chemistry. Because personally, like I said, I'm a very logical kind of guy, so I sometimes find it really hard to accept anomalies. But I guess it's just because my understanding level is just too low at this moment. So I can't truly appreciate chemistry as well as all its exceptions. Overall, I would just say, if you are taking chemistry, just learn to have fun with the subject since you are already taking it. If you want to, you can also search for stuff online to see how chemistry is useful in real life to help you have the drive to continue learning chemistry. Personally, I watched this Japanese anime called Doctor Stone, where it talks a lot about chemistry and the making of all these scientific materials. So personally, I found that really interesting, especially when it got to the chemistry part of it, and it really gave me a sort of drive to continue learning chemistry. So yeah, if you are already taking the subject, just try to have fun with it and learn as much as you can. So all the best to you in your A-level journey for chemistry. I hope you found this video useful, and if you do, please drop a like, subscribe, and I'll keep more videos coming out about the other subjects. Okay, see you. Bye bye.